when I moved, and here's where kind of the personal and political and the scholarly kind of intertwine, because for family reasons, amongst others, I moved from Europe to the US and decided to take a break from frontline advocacy and to really focus more on writing and teaching. But I carried on, of course, with the area of work that I had specialized in, which was human rights, and in particular issues at the intersection of gender and migration and nationality, which is what I'd worked on. So citizenship questions, how they impinge differently on women from men, how you could use the law, either kind of in an individual litigation sense or in a broader law reform sense to try and change and improve the situation. And so I did that for some years, and working on issues to do with immigration control and refugee protection now in the US. So of course, issues to do with the US-Mexico border, issues to do with detention. And nearly by chance, I started working on issues related to children. And I say by chance because at that stage, my own children were young. And so I actually avoided children's issues because, as anybody with children, especially small children, knows, it's particularly kind of painful to be representing children who could have been your own, who are in terrible situations. So I used to kind of push that work to my colleagues. But maybe I'll just tell a small incident and try not to be too long-winded. So I used to, as part of my work, and we first came to the US to Chicago, to the University of Chicago. So we lived on the south side of Chicago, which was a wonderfully vibrant place to kind of get inducted into human rights activism in the US, I would say. And apart from teaching at the University of Chicago Law School and some writing, I also worked in something called the Midwest Coalition for Human Rights, which was, as the name suggests, a coalition of lawyers, advocates, scholars across the Midwest. And we would meet, periodically and have discussions about issues of the day. And I remember in particular one meeting when a very experienced immigration lawyer, a colleague of ours, brought this case to the group saying he was really looking for advice from all of us. He had no idea what to do. And it was a case of a little girl, age 6, from Gujarat in India, who he was meant to represent. And she kind of turned up at his office with someone from the detention facility, the immigration detention facility, of course not speaking a word of English, with burn marks all over her body. And this tiny little thin girl on her own from Gujarat in northwest India. And our colleague said, I'm an immigration lawyer. I have never represented a 6-year-old, let alone a 6-year-old who doesn't speak the same language as me. What am I supposed to do? And that really turned on a light bulb for me, because it was a good question, because actually nobody had the answer. And in the US, there was no concept that every child like that should be entitled to legal assistance paid by the state. There was no concept that an unaccompanied child should have a guardian. There was no concept that there should be child-specific procedures. So that was the beginning of a long trajectory of developing a whole body of scholarship on child-specific persecution in asylum law, which I did together with, we started with a colleague who is now, who's called Wendy Young, who is now the CEO of a wonderful organization called KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, which is the national organization that represents unaccompanied children. So the two of us kind of wrote an important article way back then, just looking at how children had a claim to refugee protection in their own right, which had never really been kind of dissected in a scholarly way. So that was the start of that. And then over the years, that work just developed. And now, not only because of my work, but I think I made some small contribution, this is now a really burgeoning field of work. So there are many young lawyers who go into representing children. There are scholars who work on this. There are government officials who specialize in this. So that was how I came to work on. So it was really the intersection between my interest in immigration, refugee protection, kind of opposing really racial discrimination, which is a lot of what immigration is about, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the interest in vulnerable populations, which had started with work on gender, showing how women also initially were just kind of like lost in the mix. The man was the head of household and the woman was an attachment, using that same framework to talk about children. So, so child protection and kind of refugee protection and immigration work kind of came together. So, and then that led me to work more on children.